The alternative, as I think, is some kind of communism.
So actually I could spend the next 1 hour simply thanking him and do nothing more, and even that would be not enough. But instead of that, I'll speak about what he so generously, kindly invited me for, which is to speak about Buddha and his Dhamma in the light of what the Prabodh Collective is doing here. And I'm really, really happy to be here and to talk to all of you. So yes, I want to talk about the Buddha and his Dhamma, and there is indeed a certain an idea or a specific relationship that I want to discuss with you, which I have already discussed and addressed a little bit in a series of public seminars that I did in Delhi and GNU in the last few months, this year, which was on Marx and Ambedkar, Marx and Ambedkar in relation to labor and service. The same theme was addressed, and the theme being, so just to repeat the title, and it is a title indeed, as Vaibhav just said, with a question mark at the end. That's very important, because it is not something which one is sure about. One is examining the possibility of looking at the Buddha and his Dhamma as what I am calling the Book of General Intellect. Ideally, I should write it in some whiteboard or some kind of a, so that it's very clear the way this possibility is actually displayed or represented, because when I say the Book of General Intellect, I say this very consciously, not a book, but the book, and B with a capital B, and General Intellect with G capital and I capital. So there is something here that is not simply, the words are not used in their common, in the common usage. The words are being used with some sort of a specificity, a singularity, a kind of value is being attached to these words. Insofar as values are attached to words, they partly at least have the weight of what we call concepts. So to that extent, the question would be, or the question you would have a right to ask me, would be, what is the concept of the book and what is the concept of general intellect, such that we can think about the Book of General Intellect. And finally, why should the Buddha and his Dhamma, a book that some of us know and read with a lot of interest, why should that book be seen in the light of these concepts of general intellect and the Book of General Intellect? This, I think, is more or less the line of inquiry that I would like to follow, the thread. And in doing that, hopefully also offer a few clarifications. But as I was thinking about this talk, and frankly, because of a lot of university work and other things, I was not able to, apart from what I had already done with my public lectures on this theme, I was not able to work on the talk that much. I should have, but I just didn't get the time. But whatever little I was able to manage, rereading, last night I was rereading, I think it is Dharmakirti's copy of the Buddha and his Dhamma, and Dhananjay Keer's biography of Ambedkar, and looking at the material around the writing of the Buddha and his Dhamma between, let's say, 1954 to 1956, so many facts again sort of jumped on me and created such an impact on my mind that before I actually talk about the question of general intellect, I really have to recount the narrative, the story of the Buddha and his Dhamma. Not just the story of the Buddha and his Dhamma, the story of the times. And the times located in a very specific region within post-independent Indian history. And that is clearly the region which is right here and now. Here, not now, but here and then. Not here and now, here and then. Which is Pune and Maharashtra. Of course, we all know that Ambedkar is working here and he's been doing that always. But in that period, I find a different kind of intensity developing around the regional specificity of the new state of Maharashtra. The question of the state of Maharashtra, I think, is central to the writing of the Buddha and his Dhamma. Something which never occurred to me earlier. But as I was reading Dhananjay Keat's recounting of how the text was written and what else was going on at that time, and what were the larger issues that concerned Ambedkar, but also other interlocutors, the members of the Constituent Assembly, erstwhile Constituent Assembly, and then the Indian Parliament and the Maharashtra Legislative Assembly. In all of these spaces, the things that were going on really concerned, it seems to me, the development, what I'm going to call a certain nomadic clarification of the situation of Maharashtra, which means Ambedkar is writing Buddha and his Dhamma, but is also writing it through moving between different places in Maharashtra. Which, of course, as you all can see, that the narrative, the drama as it were, culminates in a certain place in Maharashtra in 1956 with the conversion, and that is Nagpur. But it is not Nagpur in isolation. Actually, Nagpur is the development of a kind of spatial unfolding within Maharashtra, moving from Bombay, which is a place from which Maharashtra has also to separate itself, partly because Bombay is the Bombay presidency of the old pre-independence India. So in a way, Maharashtra state to form itself must also separate itself from Bombay and move through and make itself as moving through Pune, Dehu, Aurangabad and other places, and eventually with a certain event, which is the conversion in 1956, Nagpur becomes one of those nodal points in which a certain, not just Buddhist, not just the question of conversion as a specific emancipatory event of the struggle of the erstwhile untouchables, but also, in a sense, the identity of Maharashtra not simply as a linguistic state, but being formed through different kinds of movements, one of which is the conversion movement, where Nagpur becomes a particular kind of emblematic nodal spatial point. But it doesn't happen in isolation. This intensity actually, so I'm talking of Nagpur now not merely as a space of a place of Diksha Bhumi, the way we think of it as a geographical location where so many people assembled, but it's also what I'll call an intensive place, a place of a particular intensity. So Maharashtra here doesn't mean merely the collection of towns and cities and also the linguistic entity of Maharashtra. Maharashtra also means in that time the development of a nomadic intensity. Literally moving from town to town, moving between towns, between one place and another, through which Ambedkar is also writing something which apparently has nothing to do with this, which is the Buddha and his Dhamma. And yet, the more I read Dhananjay Keat and other accounts of the writing of Buddha and his Dhamma, it seems to me that it is a persuasive picture to say that Ambedkar is writing Buddha and his Dhamma and at the same time trying to create within Maharashtra a certain, again, nomadic pursuit of the Buddha. So it is as if the Buddha is being chased across Maharashtra. And I mean this very concretely because at every moment from 1954 to 56, what Ambedkar is interested in is to form different institutions, colleges, centers of discussion. Of course, it's not limited to Maharashtra, because one of the places he also thinks of and has a long discussion with different other, and I'll come to that, with other collaborators, is to set up an institute of comparative religion and culture in Bangalore. And in that, he is actually having an elaborate discussion with different Buddhist institutions and groups from South Asian countries, including Japan, East Asian and South Asian countries. So one of the places that he thinks of outside Maharashtra is Bangalore. But initially he thinks of Pune, to set up an institute of comparative culture and comparative religion. So that becomes very interesting. That what is the comparative interest that is also unfolding as he is writing Buddha and his Dhamma? So one of the frameworks that I think one has to look at very carefully, very closely, developing at that time, is the framework of a comparative thinking that is going on with Ambedkar. And interestingly, if you look at what is going on, then you see that it's not limited to simply a question of religion. It's limited to something which could be called religion and politics, where as you approach the final moment of Buddha and his Dhamma and what happens immediately after Buddha and his Dhamma till his death, which is his lecture, Marx and Buddha, or Marx or Buddha, however you want to think of it, it doesn't matter, in Kathmandu, then you find that this question of religion and politics in the context of Buddhism is absolutely unambiguously highlighted and in front of you. So the framework seems to be comparative religion, but also comparative internationalism. This is the hypothesis that I'd like to place before you, which I already partly talked about in my lectures in JNU. So there is a comparative interest in a certain kind of comparison of religions, in which Christianity, of course, plays a part. But there is also a comparative interest in political internationalism, in which there is a clear competition, not confrontation, but a competition, contestation, contest, literally, race, like a race, between from the dominant paradigm of internationalism in the 1950s, which is communist internationalism, but also an internationalism which has not been named as such, but it's very much there, at least in the Asian context. And that is what I'm going to call a Buddhist internationalism. And in his lecture called Marx Buddha in Kathmandu, it's very clear that, and openly, there is no hesitation or shame about it, he is openly addressing the question of Buddhism as a propagandist. So, when I say propagandist, I mean, it's just a totally otherwise unrelated footnote, but I mean it in a very strong sense. There was a great theatre thinker in Bengal called Utpal Dutt, and once he had said that I'm not primarily, an artist or an actor and all those bourgeois elite things that you people talk about. I am a propagandist. So I'm not comparing Utpal Dutt with Ambedkar. That would be a totally different thing. But what I'm saying is, in that sense of a strong affirmative almost meaning of propaganda, in Buddha and Marx, you find Ambedkar talking clearly as a propagandist of a Buddhist internationalism. And to that extent, like any propagandist, you have to also contend with other propagandists. So the other propagandist for him there is the communist propagandist. And there's a clear target, which is what he's calling in that lecture the youth. The youths. So he's saying the youths are definitely drawn by communism. But the youths would have a worthy alternative to choose from if we were able to reach to them the message of Buddha. So he's not dismissing the other side, but he's saying, let us give the youth a worthy option. And to do that, let us take the meaning of Buddha to the youths. So youth becomes an addressee, someone to reach. And at that level, the perspective is indeed universal and internationalist. He is not talking about youth in Maharashtra, in India, or anywhere in specific regional terms. He's really speaking about the youth as such in that particular time period. So it seems to me that at that time, two very, very interesting polar opposite points are actually working together, are being articulated together. One is the specific regional nomadic movement within Maharashtra to constitute something like a Marathi nomadism, or a nomadic kind of, I'll use the figure of nomad's camp. So the image is Nagpur is the final campsite before he dies. So it's like nomads move from camp to camp. So Aurangabad is a camp, Pune is a camp, and eventually Nagpur is a camp. Instead of just being a pilgrimage or a final goal, these are camps through which Ambedkar is moving. Mass camps, part of mass movements who come to, yet camps. Though of course the word camp is very dangerous. A lot of you must already be thinking about it, because camp would also remind you of the concentration camps. Camps as a place of confinement, as a case of incarceration. But the word camp has that rich ambiguity. On the one hand, camps do stand for Bedouin camps, nomadic movement, where people take provisional shelter. And at the same time, camps are also places where refugee camps, people after partition are forced into. So frankly, here I do not mean it in the terrible negative sense. I mean it in the sense of a nomadic possibility. And I'm thinking of Maharashtra as a nomadic possibility, and yet constituting a new state of Maharashtra at that time. A certain significance of Maharashtra at that time. Very different from Maratha identity, clearly. Very different from that discussion we can have separately, I don't want to get into that, which is the idea of Maharashtra as an identity of a certain, what Phule would call a fictional people called Maratha. Because Phule was never, he said, who is Maratha? I don't know who is Maratha. But today, Maratha is absolutely at the center of, with the contemporary, the High Court and everything. It's right at the center of our reality here in Maharashtra. So when I speak of the Maharashtra nomadism or the nomadic formation of Maharashtra, then I don't mean it Maratha, I mean Maharashtra, not Maratha. And Ambedkar is part of that movement. At the same time, something which cannot be actually regionalized at all, which is the other idea, which is the international nomadism. And yet between the two, between the Buddhist internationalism as a framework and this formation of Maharashtra as the other micro framework, there is clearly a common idea, a common image, which is the image of this nomadism. The image of this kind of a movement which is, on the one hand, searching or following a certain thread, and at the same time, which is resisting getting stagnant, getting rigidified with any one particular fetishized image. So this is what I want to explore today. So the question then is, if this is overall the narrative, the narrative which is supporting my so-called theoretical reading of Buddha and his Dhamma, not a reading, but a framing, but an entry into Buddha and his Dhamma, then the next question would be, of course, in a preliminary way, to answer the conceptual question: what is general intellect? Because clearly, general intellect, at least in those absolutely bland terms, is not Ambedkar's vocabulary. So what is this vocabulary that I am grafting onto Ambedkar? So that's the main thing which I'll come to. But before that, we have to also look at so that's why it was important to write it down, doesn't matter. The book. When I say the book of general intellect, then what is this image of the book with a capital B? And here I am actually not imposing or grafting any vocabulary from the outside. It is Ambedkar's own word. So, as you all know, when Ambedkar was writing, and again to go back to this point, Ambedkar is writing the Buddha and his Dhamma over a long period of time, and there are so many frameworks to keep in mind, one overlaid with another. One of the frameworks is, of course, as we all must never forget, Ambedkar's physical condition. His terrible illness, which he addresses in Buddha and his Dhamma. So it is not outside the Buddha and his Dhamma. So that's something which I notice again and again, which I'd like to bring to you. That the Buddha and his Dhamma has actually strangely texts and layers which apparently have nothing to do with the Buddha and his Dhamma or the Buddha and his religion and so on and so forth. So there is a kind of story being told here, or many stories being told in the Buddha and his Dhamma, and yet they get integrated into something which is, again Ambedkar's word, which is a philosophy, which is a thought. So one such narrative is Ambedkar's own life towards the end of his life. his health, and his references to his wife, who is upper caste, who is a doctor, a part which Dhananjay Keer says, I have to track this down, of course, later. I haven't done it, but maybe we can discuss it, which is edited out later from the Buddha and his Dhamma. He refers to his wife. So many things are going on. So anyway, he's terribly ill, and yet he's working breathlessly, literally breathlessly, because he has a lot of breathing problems at that time. He's working all the time. So in one of his preparatory statements, he says, I want to write the Book of Buddhism. The Book of Buddhism. Now, the Book of Buddhism clearly is referring to the model of the book as in the book of a monotheistic religion. Clearly, Islam and Christianity come to mind, including Judaism, of course, but the Bible and the Quran come to mind as the two books of specific religions. So, what is a book in that sense? This is something which first we need to clarify quickly. What is the book instead of a book among books? What is the book? Of course, one clear answer to that is, what is the Bible? It is the gospel, a gospel. And Ambedkar uses this word too in the beginning. He says, actually the first title of the first 50 copies that he sent around to his, a kind of private circulation before it was printed, the title was at that time, The Buddha and His Gospel. It was not Buddha and His Dhamma. It was Buddha and His Gospel. He was actually using the same word that was used in the case of the Bible or the Quran, but mostly the Bible, of course, the Gospel. But he changed that. In a talk that he gave, so in this narrative there are so many episodes that we must go back to. He's speaking of Buddhism again and again at different forums. It starts mostly in Rangoon, in the World Buddhist Conference before the last one he attends, which is in Kathmandu. He starts in Rangoon, in Burma. And in Rangoon, he speaks of South Asian countries and Asian countries who must, in a sense, stand up for Buddhism. And he is not hopeful about India at all. So India is not hospitable to Buddhism. But the other countries, so again and again he uses the phrase Buddhist countries. And he says that these Buddhist countries must stand up to both dogmatic religion on the one side, where he means Hinduism, but also, like I said, the challenge of a competitive internationalism. He doesn't use that word, that's my word, but that is the meaning, which is communism. And there he has a very regional reference. So he relates communism at that time to something that has already happened in communist history, which is not only the theory of Marx, but something which has already happened. And it's clear what that is. That is Russia. So again and again, his point of analysis and contention is Russia, the experience of Russia, and the failings of the Russian Revolution. That he takes. So his concrete criticism of Marx is not in Marx merely, but in Russia. So to me, it's not just a question of a historical reference of Russia. It's a question of the degeneration of communist nomadism into a specific point of rigidification, which is post-revolutionary Russia. This is what he has in mind. Which again concretely means what? From nomadism of thinking to the formation of the state, the Russian state. That is Ambedkar's target, the failings of the Russian state. Against that, he is not speaking of nomadism as a vague dream. He is speaking of this possibility of a thinking which remains open, but again through an international national perspective, international national perspective, because he is speaking from the side of Buddhist countries. So this is a kind of equivocation that you see in Ambedkar at that time. Anyway, so that's one beginning episode in Rangoon. And before Buddha and his Dhamma, he gives a talk on Buddhism to BBC. And in that talk, he again brings up this question of Marxism and communism and Buddhism. And he uses a phrase which I hadn't noticed earlier, and that is striking. He speaks of, so like his lucidity was exemplary. So he starts with a very lucid question. He simply says, why I like Buddhism. And why Buddhism is useful for the world. And then he goes on to say that Buddhist communism is better than communism. But this phrase, Buddhist communism, is his phrase. I hadn't noticed it earlier. So he's doing something linguistically extraordinary. He's, in a sense, freeing communism from its historical moorings in a certain story, which goes up and down, of course, up to, in his own view, the Russian capture of communism or this movement into something like a state, rigid state capture and a kind of degeneration. He never mentions Stalin. I don't think Stalin is worth his time. But Lenin he does. Lenin he does. But he does talk of the Russian state. And he says, Buddhist communism is better. So there, clearly, he's freeing communism as a word and trying to give it a generic value, a nomadic, in my words, a nomadic possibility, instead of it referring to a totally captured historical image and narrative, which kind of ends with Russia. So he's opening up the word communism through Buddhism and his own thinking post-1970. But again, one must not, from our side, again, absolutize these things. He does mention Buddhist communism, but he does it only once, to my knowledge. So he doesn't reject communism in the sense of the very word which is an understandable fear with a lot of Dalit movements today, that you just don't, get hegemonized or appropriated by the word of the left, which is communism. Don't, keep it away, keep it away. I understand that. But when one reads Ambedkar, one sees that he is not afraid of all that. At the same time, he doesn't overdo it. He doesn't overdo it. So in Marx Buddha, the last lecture after Buddha and his Dhamma, he speaks of it very analytically. So what is communism? What is Buddhism? And what are the points on which Buddhism scores over as a propagandist, but also a kind of propagandist analyst, propagandist logician, though the two don't usually go together. But he actually tries to do that impossible combination of a propagandist logician, a logical propagandist. And he says that Buddhism is, in certain analytical respects, better than Marxism and communism. There he doesn't get into Buddhist communism at all. But at the same time, he doesn't in any way treat the word communism as a word which is taboo, which is to be prohibited, which is to be forbidden from discourse. Neither does he do. He treats it as one word among many, a concept word which needs to be analyzed in the light both of its theoretical difficulties and its historical unfolding, which he does, very briefly. Now, the point is that that lecture is actually, again, one of the fragments that we have of a project in this period where he is wanting to write a whole book, which is Marx and Buddha, Karl Marx and Buddha. So, it is not simply a lecture. It is a last project of his life which he was never able to finish. So Buddha and his Dhamma project, Marx and Buddha, and at the same time the other side. So he actually wants to deal what in today's terms we would call from the one end of the left to the other end of the right. Because what are the other two books that he wants to write? Part of which is now there for us to read. One is Revolution and Counter-Revolution, which I'm going to address in tomorrow's talk, in Indian history, and Riddles of Hinduism. So there, he is now going to the other end, which is to again analyze and dismantle the dogmas of Hinduism, what he calls the riddles of Hinduism, and the history of Hinduism as a history of counter-revolution. So all of this he's doing at the same time in those last 4 years when he's so terribly ill. So there is something heroic about it. But at the same time, what is interesting is that while he's doing this, he's also doing something which has to be thought about very carefully, which is that he is preparing for the conversion. He's not converted. This is something we must, think about. It is something striking. What usually is the sequence where that lead the historical narrative which usually leads to the conversion, a conversion in the history of conversions? Usually what happens is someone who is already part of a religion, an authority, a missionary, a person who is completely devoted to the passion of converting and so on and so forth, or someone who does it for political reasons, an imperialist kind of a conversion, whatever, you can look at it in many ways, but someone who is already part of a faith, part of an order, part of a church, part of a system of power, who then converts. And one of the instruments of converting is the book. Yeah, we know that with Christianity, we know that, on a worldwide scale, no? Proselytizing and so on and so forth. The book. Now with Ambedkar, that is not the sequence. In fact, the term that has been used to Ambedkar's conversion, and it's an apt term, is self-conversion. And that is exactly what it is. No one converts Ambedkar. Now, of course, he's influenced by many Buddhist writers. We can talk about that. Today, I don't want to deal with, and I'm not the expert on the sources of his Buddhism. We can talk about it. But the fact is, eventually, he's not converted by anyone. He is the one who's converting, in a way. And at the same time, he's converting himself. So it's a peculiar conversion. It's a conversion in which you convert yourself, and at the same time, you create that thing to which you're converting. This is the extraordinary uniqueness or singularity of Ambedkar's conversion, which is also the conversion of thousands and thousands of people, lakhs of people, which is you create that form of existence to which you're converting. Of course, not ex nihilo, not from nowhere. You are doing something with Buddhism, which is something which has existed for 5,000 years. But at the same time, you are writing a new book. Ambedkar is writing a new book, the Book of Buddhism. And there he is saying, in the BBC talk he gives, he says, Buddha and his social gospel. That's a completely new idea then. Because no earlier Buddhist text, to my knowledge, would separate, just like it would be really something which would be an innovation in Christian history to say Christ's social gospel or political gospel. No, that has been done in Latin America in different contexts. But as such, when we speak of the institutionalized book, it is always the gospel, the truth. Something which has been witnessed by the witnesses, the idea of the apostle, which is witness, the martyr witness. So you don't give it a historical classification, a worldly classification. You don't say social, you don't say philosophical, you say truth. Truth is truth, gospel is gospel. And then everything is included in it. But clearly that leads to Dhamma. That leads to the absolute kind of a rigid, blind kind of obedience. It leads to command rather than truth. It leads to the command structure rather than truth, something which is shared by everyone. So instead of that, Ambedkar very openly, in that sense, speaks like a rationalist. And he speaks of the social gospel. But at the same time, he's saying gospel, which means the structure of the gospel as the book must still remain. So you can't say a gospel. You have to always say the gospel. Of course, it's a different thing that with Christ there are several of the apostles. So we don't have actually just one version. The different apostles have different versions. Nevertheless, it all comes together as the Bible, as the New Testament. So the singleness of the book is an absolute precondition for the book to exist. And Ambedkar actually is somebody who subscribes to that very rigorously. He does speak of the book of Buddhism. And one of the weaknesses of Buddhism, he finds, is actually its multiplicity of versions and stories. And instead of that, he wants the book. And at the same time, he is changing the essential nature of that book and calling it the social gospel, and not just the gospel. And then eventually changing the very word gospel to Dhamma. And in the book, the Buddha and the Dhamma, giving us a very clear reason to do it by saying that Dhamma is true and Dharma is a corruption. The Hindu Sanskritic Dharma is a corruption. So even at the linguistic level between Sanskrit and Pali, he is making an intervention. But as a rationalist, he actually gives us in the first book itself a very clear conceptual program which he is undertaking with the Buddha and his Dhamma. And he calls it Of course, if you read the introduction, you already see what he's doing. And he says, he doesn't say Buddhism is great, let us all become Buddhists. He says, why Buddhism will not be taken up by any rational person? Because there are so many things that exist in extant Buddhism, the Buddhism that we know, which doesn't make sense to us. So one of the most glaring examples is the parivraja, the change, the conversion, if you will, of Siddhartha. And he says it doesn't make sense that a 28-year-old or 30-year-old man will not have ever known of death or seen a death. Makes no sense. This is not good. No one's going to get convinced of this. So he starts with Buddhism as a weak point. He doesn't start with Buddhism as the great religion, whose greatness remains immemorial and untouched. No, he starts from the other, that it's a historical moment in which I'm looking at Buddhism, and it's a weak moment for Buddhism, a moment of its low point actually. But at the same time, potentially there is something going on here that needs to be recuperated, retold, even reinvented, if you will. And in that sense, he gives the program a very clear, in the English language, very clear programmatic statement. He calls it the problem of a new perspective. So that is what it is, it seems to me, essentially. That this book called The Buddha and His Dhamma must present to us the problem of new perspective. And at the same time, in presenting the problem of a new perspective, it must make that perspective definitive, in that sense produce the book. But is that the book then only a conceptual sort of a conceptual totality? That book is a kind of definitive philosophy? The best idea? Is that what the book is? But no, that is not the only level at which the book exists. Of course, if you see the history of the Bible, and not just the Bible, the Quran and other great books of religion, then you see that these books always have a certain history of reading. And in a way, when I talk about the Gita tomorrow, we will see that the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, competes with the great monotheistic books from 19th century through the Orientalist intervention. So the Orientalists say the Gita is or could be made into another kind of a great monotheistic book, the Bhagavad Gita. And Ambedkar questions this whole program and exposes it, whatever. But that image of the book is there. So the book is always accompanied by a history of the reading of the book, but the reading is always structured. So in the reading of the Bible, there is a structure of reading, which is a hermeneutics, which is called exegesis. So there are levels through which the Bible must be read. The moral level, the symbolical level, and the anagogical level, and so on. They're technical, but at the same time something which has to be followed by people who are trained. It's a kind of institution of reading. That's one thing we know. But that is not the only thing. And of course, the Quran and the Hadith. And that's true for many, many such books. But that's not the only thing. The more effective and the more comprehensive level at which the book exists is not the literal book or the book of the word, but the book as a space of congregation. The book is what people congregate around. The book is a space of the people. The book of the people. What is the people? So in Jewish religion you find this absolutely clearly. Who are the Jews? They are the book. They are the people of the book. What is the book? The book is the people. So that to me is something which must be understood very clearly. The book is something which is a book, the truth. In that sense, the direct truth, revealed truth. So it's a revealed idea, revealed from Buddha, revealed from Christ, revealed from some source like that. Second, it has a history of reading, a historical but a structured code of reading. And the third, which is the political reality of the book, which is the book as a gathering or a coming together of the people. The people, instead of being a disparate collection of multitudes, must now become the people of the book. And the book must become a people. So if you want to look at it numerically, you move from multiplicity to one. So the book is one. It is a kind of formula for the one, a template for the one. So, at that level, it doesn't matter. The constitution can be the book. Anything can serve that purpose. So today, when a completely different kind of a source says, a different kind of a discourse says, one nation, then it has the same kind of a formula. The one under which a people become a body. So that's why the book is also a body. The book is not simply a word through which meaning is conveyed. Book is, in a sense, a kind of incorporeal body. And of course, it's also a corporeal body, because in Sikhism, for instance, the Guru Granth Sahib is the physical, the book is like the only thing which is really at the center of the Golden Temple. No? It's also a physical body. But not just the book. The Guru Granth Sahib is there, but the people are doing a liturgy, they are doing a service around the book. So the book has then a reality which must be understood in terms of concept, in terms of reading and interpretation, but also in terms of a people body. The book is a people body. And to me, it seems to me that Ambedkar is actually trying to draw on all these three levels of constituting the book when he is writing the Buddha and his Dhamma. And I think it's very important to keep these frameworks in mind before one, so to speak, reads Buddha and his Dhamma, which would be only the intellectual level. And often we do it, and it's very important to do so, and I'll come to the last part with that now. But if we do it only at that intellectual level of reading its philosophy or its basic structures and its meanings and all that, it does create a very important space of discussion for our times. But what it cuts down on, it underplays, is the original ambition, the historical magnitude of the intervention. The magnitude of the intervention of the Buddha's Dhamma is not merely intellectual. It is political, it is existential, and religion in a way is the covering term which seems to include all of this. So that's why in Ambedkar says religion, and this is something with Ambedkar which is a very complicated thing which we must always look at very carefully. He always means religion in at least two ways. One is what he calls in Annihilation of Caste, a religion of habits, a religion of rituals, a religion which repeats ceremonies, repeats rites, repeats cyclically festivals. So in that sense, he's an anti-culturalist. Insofar as all of this is equal to culture, because culture is cyclical. So every time as a Bengali Durga Puja comes, I get excited. In Maharashtra, Ganesh, people get excited. Ambedkar says this excitement is boring. We do get excited, but this excitement is the excitement of the old. Yes, we need excitement, but excitement for something we have never seen before. So that is not culturalist. Of course, culture is part of it, but culture must be not culturalist culture, but some other culture. You can call it political. He uses religion in the second sense now, and he calls it religion of principles, where the religion itself, which is a way of associating with others, but that religion itself will be sharing of something which is, let me put it this way in a very kind of condensed phrase, the emotion of new thought. A new thought which will produce a new emotion. People share the emotion of a new thought. So this is what he says, again he uses the same word, religion, that we must give a lot of value to. Religion as the sharing of the emotion of a new thought. And absolutely reject religion as habit, religion as repetition, religion as ritual, and religion as culture. But of course, you see, again there is an ambiguity here, because with after Buddha and his Dhamma, with the conversion, he actually does adopt several rites. He does adopt several ceremonies. There is a certain theatricalization of the conversion, no doubt about it. But his answer would be very clear. If you were to, raise this doubt, he would say, no, there's no problem here, because I do it consciously. I do it rationally. I do not do it out of a reflex. I do not do it because before I know it, I'm doing it. No, I know what I'm doing. That's why I rationally create new rituals. Now, this is a very, very interesting but also a bewildering topic for people who think about ritual in a way that goes beyond simply cultural, cyclical performances. They think of ritual as something which is part of communitarian unconscious, but that unconscious is primordial, something archetypal. So there the question is, can new rituals ever be created? Or is the new in ritual always something which is also unconscious? Can one consciously ever do ritual? If one consciously does ritual, is it ritual? Yeah, this question will always arise. But while this question is arising, Ambedkar is doing what he's doing, which is produce new rites and rituals minimally for the Buddhism that he practices. But you see, again, to go back to this point, when does he do this, create the new rituals for the conversion on 14th October? He does it after he has finished the Buddha and his Dhamma. This is the uniqueness. He first writes the book and then converts. He doesn't convert and then write the great book. He actually says this. He says, first I must finish the book, only then can the conversion happen. And he plans it like that. And because he's so ill, he's also, Dhananjay Keer, of course, writes very vividly about it. He says, Ambedkar wept. So almost like Christ wept. Ambedkar wept. Often he says, Ambedkar wept. So wept at the hopelessness of the project, that he will die before he's able to achieve what he has set out to achieve. Which is first to write the book and then to convert. But not convert others, convert himself. And this is an absolutely unique event of conversion, which is a self-conversion in this way. So my point is, we must keep all these levels in mind before we do the relatively limited task of intellectually reading the Buddha and his Dhamma. Now I come to that for just the last few minutes. So in that sense, I'm not really addressing the topic that I promised. But I thought before coming to that topic, we need to really open up the field in which this book actually emerged, the historical and the larger field in which this book emerged, the Buddha and his Dhamma. Nevertheless, the intellectual hypothesis that I have. So quickly now moving to some other terrain.
The alternative, as I think, is some kind of communism.